Right. Well, welcome everyone to this second in the series of HeartEdge introductory seminars hosted by HeartEdge, but also the Diocese of Brisbane and Melbourne. And it's terrific to have such a great number again for this second session. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jeremy Greaves. I'm the Bishop for the Northern region of the Diocese of Brisbane. And my role this evening is to chair the session and to get us started. So before I make some introductions, we'll begin with a prayer. So let us pray. Lord of creation, we thank you for the abundance that surrounds us. Lift our eyes from our worries to delight in all that you have made. Help us to see through the fog of fear and worry, to once again notice and experience delight. Help us to be attentive to all the gifts before us, but also help us to be attentive to the signs of your kingdom. Help us to notice what might easily be missed, to witness your work in the world, to witness your kingdom. Inspire us to creative action, to innovate, that we might witness to your work in the world, that we might witness to your kingdom. Amen. So thank you all for joining us again this evening. After our first session last week, this week we begin to unpack the 4 C's of the HeartEdge model for mission and ministry a little bit more, with stories from 4 different places in the Diocese of Melbourne and the Diocese of Brisbane. Before we do that, just another reminder, if you could keep yourself on mute until you get to a point where you're going to ask a question, or in the case of the presenters, until you're presenting, that would be terrific. The first half of the presentation, as each of the 4 presenters are doing their thing, will be recorded, and again that recording will be available at some point after the session. So you'll be able to watch it again and pick up all those little bits that you miss first time round. Please use the chat function of Zoom. That's the best place to keep asking questions and to engage in conversation, and we'll try and keep an eye on the chat to pick out questions to ask the panel a little later on as we go. There's a few members of the HeartEdge team with us helping this evening. Catherine and Ben, who will be working sort of behind the scenes, keeping an eye on the chat and helping me keep an eye on the chat. But I particularly want to introduce Jonathan Evans, who's going to chair the middle section of tonight. Jonathan's the Associate Vicar for Partnership Development at St Martin in the Fields, working with HeartEdge to encourage congregations to engage with those 4 C's of culture, compassion, commerce, and congregations. And so that's his role with HeartEdge. Before being ordained, Jonathan worked with the civil service, forming partnerships to support disabled people in finding or retaining work. And so he has a long history in this space of building partnerships and engaging people in all sorts of different ways. So Jonathan, thank you so much for your work and for leading this part of the session this evening. I'll hand over to you.
Well, thank you, Bishop Jeremy. It's a great joy to be involved in this session and in the series, and HeartEdge and the whole team are hugely excited about the opportunity to share with you and to explore some of the HeartEdge concepts and thinking together. In exploring what church might need to look like and some opportunities for change as we emerge from the experience of the pandemic, last week, Sam Wells focused on 2 key principles of HeartEdge. First, the idea that renewal comes from the edge, but that we need to be open to receiving that renewal in the form that God sends it. And second, that the people of God have tended to be closer to God in times of adversity than in times of plenty. And as Bishop Jeremy's already explained, without losing sight of those two key principles, today we're going to primarily focus on another key aspect of the HeartEdge ethos, which is our model of mission. Through HeartEdge, we encourage churches to develop the 4 C's of commerce, generating finance via enterprise in ways that develop mission, culture, art, music, performance, reimagining the Christian narrative for the present day, congregation, inclusive liturgy, worship, and day-to-day communal life, and compassion, addressing social need by being with those who are on the edge. And we think that nurturing each of those 4 C's is essential for renewal of the church, because the 4 C's taken together provide a means by which we can reimagine church and society. In thinking about the future shape of the church, we believe that Christianity must take the present opportunity to be what it was always called to be, that is, an alternative society, overlapping and sharing space with regular society, but living in a different time. That's to say, modeling God's future in our present, or living God's future now. And the 4 C's offer a model of what a renewed society might look like. The interdependence of commerce, culture, compassion, and congregational life is that model, because it sustains itself, is open to the gift of strangers, and it exhibits the life of faith. And in thinking about that vision and model this evening, we begin by exploring examples and stories of using the 4 C's with clergy from the 2 dioceses. So I'm really pleased to be joined by Karen Terpstra, John Sanderson, Suzanne Grimmett, and Deborah Bird, who are going to share their experiences of using the 4 C's within their parishes. To begin, each is going to introduce initiatives that relate to one of the 4 C's. So Karen's going to take culture, John's going to take commerce, Sue's going to take compassion, and Deb, congregation. And we'll then discuss the 4 C's further amongst ourselves before then opening up the conversation, as Bishop Jeremy indicated, to your comments and questions. So as we did last week, please do use the chat to share those comments and questions as they occur to you as we go along. I'd like to bring Karen into the conversation at this point and to share examples of culture from your context. Thank you, Karen. Welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. Just before I launch into talking about these initiatives that we have in process at St Margaret's, what you're going to hear tonight is from the range of us, and for many of us, some of these things are already in place and working amazingly. These things that we're doing, we're still in the process of trying to get up and running. I'll talk a bit more about that as we go through. So I wanted to base what I say tonight around 2 of the 7 theses that Sam Wells makes in the first chapter of his book, A Future That's Bigger Than the Past. If you haven't read it, it's really worth reading, and I'm going to be working through that with my parish council this year as we work towards a revisioning process of what's happening in the parish and charting the way forward. So these 2 theses that I want to focus on are, in contrast to defensiveness, fertile centres of creative and artistic flourishing through which people apprehend beauty in the world and talent in themselves and in one another. So with this thesis, what I thought fits really well as a way of embodying what that suggests when we come to thinking about how we engage with culture. We've been setting the groundwork for a music scholarship program for young musicians in our area, because our organists are becoming less able to contribute, and we've got a concern to see young musicians flourish, as well as to pass on the rich heritage of Christian music through the ages. So we're offering between 2 and 3 scholarships whereby the parish pays half of the young person's music tuition fees for the year in exchange for them playing on one Sunday a month in church. And the idea is that over time, they'll develop some confidence and the ability to play even more of the service than just a couple of the hymns. And eventually perhaps even discover a love of church music, which inspires some ongoing involvement and connection. But even if these young people don't remain connection, part of our aim is to foster the leadership and development and personal formation in young musicians, as well as offering a point of contact and exposure to faith. And I should actually also say that this is something that has been tried before. In my previous parish at Beval, we had a similar thing in place, and that worked really well. So we are really hoping at St Margaret's, as we connect into the local school communities, and we've got a couple of music teachers that we're going to be working with, that this is something that some of the young folk in our area will be able to take up. And like many of these things, you just don't know where the Holy Spirit will take it, and what spirit touches will do to this and where it will go. And the second thesis that I thought was a good orientation point was, in contrast to denial, penitent communities that recognise the individual and corporate legacy of the misuse of power and the dominance of some social groups over others nationally and internationally, and are seeking new forms of practice and relationship. So at St Margaret's, we have an active Do Justice group, and for the last 18 months, they've been chipping away at developing a yarning circle in partnership with the local council and local First Nations leaders. That's the Wurundjeri Council here in this area of Melbourne. And the genesis of this idea actually came from a visit that David Law, who's someone who works with Anglicare, he came and spoke to our Anglicare Parish Partnerships group, and he talked about his engagement with prisoners out at one of the prisons towards Ballarat, many of whom are Aboriginal, and he talked about how this program that he's part of skills them for their return to the world by teaching welding. And as part of the welding course, the group makes braziers from recycled railway parts. And in it, part of what they do is they do, I don't remember what it is, where you cut into steel so you can see words. Anyway, this word is Womanjeka, which is the Wurundjeri word for welcome. And that's attached to the bottom of the brazier. And this visit by David Law sparked great interest in the wider parish circle, and it prompted Do Justice, along with other people who'd been present at this Anglicare Parish Partnerships meeting, to organise the manufacture and purchase of a brazier, which arrived last week. And we obtained a local council grant towards the end of last year of $3,000 for an Aboriginal artist to design the yarning circle into which this brazier will fit. And the longer term vision, given that this will be unique in the Nillumbik Shire area, is that local schools and groups will be able to use the space with the engagement of local First Nations elders. So this is something that we would actually put as part of the conditions for use, that it's not something that we white people just sit down and have a yarn around the circle, because we can do that by setting up some chairs in the parish hall. This is actually something that is a place of engagement with First Nations peoples to hear the stories and to be a space of agency for reconciliation and to make a listening space. So those are the two things that are I'm speaking about tonight that are underway. There are a couple of other things we're doing as well, but these speak particularly to culture and the interaction between faith and culture.
Tremendous, and really tremendous examples, Karen. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. I'm sure as Karen was unpacking those examples, you were already beginning to see connections, not just with culture, but with other aspects of the 4 Cs. And we'll be exploring some of the interlinkages between the 4 Cs as we go forward. But we're now going to bring John Sanderson into the conversation. John, you're very welcome. John's going to share some commercial examples with us. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good evening to friends old and new across Australia, and good morning to our friends in the United Kingdom. I'd like to share a little bit of the story of the life here of St George's, a small to medium church located in the leafy suburbs of Melbourne. We began as a church, as a mission of the nearby St James Anglican Church in 1930, what would now be known as a church plant. Over time, we evolved into our own parish by the late 50s, early 60s. And this church and this community has always sought to be the church at the heart of East Ivanhoe Village, caring for body, mind and soul of all who come here, regardless of worldview. Our commercial activities are twofold and are quite common to many Australian churches. We have an opportunity shop and we have halls and meeting rooms. In our opportunity shop, we seek to recycle, resell, reuse all the gifts of the local community that are donated to us for the benefit of others. It may be that we resell within our shop, or it might be that we recycle through partnership with 2 local authorities, or it might be that we reuse some of the goods through our partner agencies. And so as a consequence, our volunteers, numbering nearly 40 now, serve in the shop and support 20 local organisations who are primarily focused on the care of the marginalised, particularly women and children and men at risk of homelessness. With our halls and meeting rooms, we act as the default or de facto community centre for this area within the Banyule local government area. There is no other community centre in this part of Banyule. Ordinarily, outside of COVID, we acted as the regular host for about 20 to 23 local community groups, primarily focused on well-being, be it sports, music, drama, yoga, and such like programs, many of which are operated by sole traders. Throughout the journey through our 2 lockdowns here in Melbourne, we sought to continue our relationships with our hall and meeting room users and all our volunteers in the op shop. As a consequence, we've not only retained our connections with them, but we've actually broadened and deepened our relationships and even attracted new people to the site who seek to use it through activities which, in my mind, are primarily aimed at community well-being and social cohesion. As a consequence, we believe we have strong partnerships with the local community who are now, because they grasp our vision of caring for body, mind and soul, those who do not attend church or do not necessarily share our worldview, they're still minded to support the mission and ministry of this place. And later on this evening, we'll probably talk about some other partnerships in the area of environmental sustainability.
Thank you so much, John. At the very heart of that, as you mentioned right at the beginning, is the HeartEdge concept of being at the heart of our community whilst also being alongside those who are on the edge and on the margins. And that brings us very nicely to the third C, compassion. And for that, we're moving to Sue Grimmett to talk about some examples of compassionate activity from her parish. Sue, welcome and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, and hello, everyone. I'm currently speaking in the heart of the country. I normally am from a nice parish in Indooroopilly in Brisbane. I'm currently at a place called Campfire in the Heart in Alice Springs, however. And I've been doing a lot of reflecting here, and I do think one of the questions that was first raised in a HeartEdge conversation was would the wider community notice if your church, your parish church, closed its doors? Of course, it's something that we've experienced a lot in reality during a time of COVID, and it's, of course, a very confronting question. And I think it's very easy for any parish to become very engaged in maintaining itself and spending its time and energy maintaining itself without getting out to the edge at all, or without even interacting, and the local community may not be impacted by us at times. So it's a very pressing question, and our project that many churches are engaged in so many compassionate projects and so many projects for justice. Ours began because we just started having conversations with people who were working in our local area, and an obvious partner was Anglicare. Anglicare, particularly just up the road at Toowong, were working in the homelessness women's and families service just at Toowong, and we started to have a conversation with them. They were just having the opening kind of dialogue with a group called Thread Together. Now, Thread Together is an Australian not-for-profit organisation whose mission is about sourcing brand new excess clothing from fashion retailers and redistributing them to those who are most in need. The project grew from awareness that the terrible fact, the stat, that 30% of our new clothing ends up in landfill. So from an environmental perspective, that's terrible. And that actually there are so many people who would never normally have the chance for a new wardrobe while we're busy throwing this out. So when you're doing it tough, this was the sort of the ethos of Thread Together. You actually don't deserve second best. You deserve the best when you're doing it tough, not the worst. And so instead of being a handover of someone's leftover stuff, there was a way to create a dignified kind of shopping experience where they were given a gift card. People would come and choose for themselves the wardrobe, not that people could provide, but one that they actually wanted. And with the help of someone who they like to call a stylist to help them choose their wardrobe. Now, for me, there was this Thread Together project. There's many layers to the project. I don't know, Jonathan, if you have the photo, you might get a sense of, if, at some point while I'm talking, Jonathan might be able to flick up a photo of a van, because what we've taken possession of is a van that is kitted out so that we can receive the clothing and then take it out to communities. So we then take that out to the homelessness services. We've taken that to InSync Youth Services. They did a wonderful thing during the bushfires at the start of 2020. There's images of these vans out in places that were just blackened where people had lost anything. Of course, women fleeing from domestic violence frequently have fled with nothing at all. And so the chance for an entire new wardrobe is a necessity. It's, I think, one of the layers of this project for us. You can see there that the van and all the compartments inside. So it's someone's done, not us, someone, we're just lucky enough to partner on this. They've managed to get some pretty funky designs and some corporate sponsors to do this. And we just got involved through the partnership with Anglicare. Thanks, Jonathan. I think that probably gives people a bit of an idea. I think one of the layers of the project is that it's helped us to learn more about systems of injustice. It's helped us to, walk a mile in the shoes a little bit as we're just starting out, but recognising the kind of situations anyone can find themselves in, and how, there's a horrible way of say that the losers always lose, how there's systemic injustice that's geared against those who are already experienced great trauma or violence or disadvantage, and yet they end up being handed the worst. So just that growing in understanding, it was one part of the advantage of this project for us, that we actually, start to see. And as soon as you start to learn, you start to ask more questions as a community. Those dialogues start to change and shape. It also linked to another community project we were involved in that was currently called the Social Isolation Project, with other community groups who, people on the ground who started this, recognising what a big part loneliness was playing, particularly during COVID, but it had actually started before COVID struck. What we found though is, instead of, you don't go out and say we're going to address loneliness head on, but if you have projects that people believe in, that people have a heart for, because they're concerned about environmental issues, because they're concerned about the needs of those who are most vulnerable, they actually develop their relationships alongside while they're working on this project. So instead of going out and saying, how do we fix loneliness? Maybe we can look at some of the other social problems, get involved, build relationships, and then find that from a sort of a slant look at loneliness, we are developing a project that meets many needs. It's also about the relationships with our clients. The real work, I think Orange Sky Laundry found this as well, that the real stuff was happening while people were waiting in the queues. When you're fitting someone out for a whole wardrobe, it actually takes quite a while. People have to wait for a bit. And so there's a lot of lovely conversation that's possible. And so we send a few of our people out along. And so someone can be being the stylist. Other people are just engaging others in conversation. This also opened up the need for pastoral care training. And here's where HeartEdge, I think, speaks to picking up the gifts of people that are there, and how do we develop our gifts so we can be engaging in the world. And, you know, we're looking at more pastoral training, which is clearly going to flow over to other areas of our community life. So that they can, when they're there, having just a compassionate conversation with others, having, when you're sitting there, learning to listen well and engage, share stories, play with their toddlers while they're waiting to kit out the van. We've also discovered other special strengths in our communities, people that I didn't know. I've been in this parish for a couple of years, but there's skills that I wasn't aware of that suddenly people are coming to the fore because of the project. People saying, hey, this is what I can do. So it's developing gifts, and already, we've got Mothers Union, for instance. We had a very strong Mothers Union in my parish, and they've got involved. It was a natural fit because they've already been involved with domestic violence and with particularly with issues of women's equality across the globe for so many years. And so this project was a natural project for them to ally themselves. So we have times when everyone comes in, and it can be older people or younger people, because we have a comfortable place to sort the clothing. So lots of conversations happen over a cuppa while you're sorting clothing. And so there's jobs online, there's different tasks for many different people. And I think finally that sort of led to a bit of more theological reflection on what it means for us to be the church, on who we are, what is our presence in the community, how do we go to begin reconnecting, how do we address in a small way systemic injustice, and what do we learn about ourselves as we are doing this, and as we are hearing new stories and engaging in different ways, and receiving the gifts of both our own community and those who are coming from outside. Let's thread together.
Again, thank you so much, Sue, and a tremendous example of compassion, but also a wonderful example of partnership working, and with our belief within HeartEdge that renewal comes from those who are on the edge, which, as well as being those who are on the margins of society, can also be those who are on the edge of church or outside of the church congregation. The kinds of initiatives that you've just been describing and the partnerships that they involve are a way of engaging with those who are on the edge. To complete our roundup of the 4 C's, we're now going to bring in Deborah Bird. Deborah, welcome. Deborah's going to speak to congregation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Look, there's an awful lot of stuff, of course, that makes up congregational life, but I'm going to talk a little bit about liturgy, because we identify as liturgical people, a liturgical faith. We dwell in buildings that are beacons, and to put on a liturgy is something of saying, here's a rallying point to gather around, And for me, the Book of Common Prayer, the importance of it is not because it's a standard to measure against, because I think it's a vehicle that we all recognise says, in doing this together, we manifest space that we can stretch and practice being together and practice being engaged in the world through, encountering and learning broader stories. So it kind of feels a little bit weird to talk about liturgy as an edge space for renewal when it's at the absolute centre of what we do all the time as our bread and butter. But in the context of HeartEdge, I think the relevancy of liturgy is that it's full of threshold spaces where we're constantly invited to cross seasonally or theologically or in practice. There's lots of follow me kind of invitations that might have soft edges where we can invite other people in, or we can go from what we don't know to what we haven't encountered before. There's lots of space to practice moving across boundaries, such as, you know, what we imagine is religious life versus community or political life, you know, and it opens up space for integration, you know, and integration is something that we're often lacking once we leave the building, that kind of time. What's more, I think that in general, churches are right up there with places like, you know, I might be being a bit optimistic, but places like concert halls and art galleries and sports events, and that it's a place where people turn up expecting encounter or expecting nourishment or comfort or inspiration or something, you know, but that expectation is being brought into a place that we've learnt to feel safe in, because we do this regular as clockwork, you know, we feel held by the familiar patterns that we maintain. And I think the safety of liturgy is an opportunity to provide paths to places that we might not go on our own. You know, we can adopt into the story, into our canon of our shared life stories that we learn to retell informally, but also in sermons we preach and the prayers that we offer for each other. And, you know, we integrate a multitude of stories into the story of our faith. So I just want to speak, hopefully, very briefly, about a few examples of the liturgy that I think stretches our congregational life towards others and the edge. So obviously we're often engaged in those kind of invitational soft entry spaces. You know, we do lots of things these days like blessing of animals because it's a universal thing. We all love our animals. We do All Souls because everybody needs to know that their loved one is remembered. You know, Christmas nativity is a no-brainer because, you know, nearly everyone knows the nativity story and it's fun. But the liturgies that I find really start to stretch us are things like the ones that give us permission to explore. One of the first things I was given to do when I was in Budrum was to run a Teze service. And it's a funny thing because to this day I've never seen a Teze service for myself, but I was told it was consisted of chant and prayer and scripture and silence, which all sounds very beautiful, but it took me a little while to realise that Teze is effective because of what it lacks. You know, it lacks large chunks of text. It lacks that sense of being preached at or told how to interpret things. It lacks a lot of visual stimulus or a central leader to focus on, you know. So what you're left with is a space to engage with as little or as much as you like. Space to simply have a bit of quiet time in which there's no demands made on you from the world or from the church, or there's the option to rest, or there's the invitation to sit with the sparse liturgy that we have there and do a little bit of your own theology with the experience of your life and just have time to notice how that sits with you. Over time that I was conducting that service, you know, we drew from our regular congregations, but I also found it drew from very heavily from people who were flittering around the edge of the church, but also some who weren't otherwise interested in churches at all. It was a fantastic, both a soft edge and an invitation to go deeper. I also find baptismal liturgies are actually really great places to do a little bit of exploring with families who, especially the ones actually who might not become regular churchgoers. But in, you know, having those conversations of what do these vows mean to you? Why are we doing this? And then perhaps incorporating some of that story into when we're delivering the liturgy. You know, sometimes I might ask them to tell a little bit of what brought them there to their congregation, or write a little prayer of their own, or sometimes I invite the people that they've brought along to come up and bless the child with their own hope or promise, or, you know, and I think that's a gift of that we can offer that helps articulate the bonds between the family and the community that they will continue on with, even if they don't continue on with us. Some other liturgies that I find are really very useful is things like equipping liturgies, you know, things that people can do themselves. So New Year's liturgies are great because they help people name the things in their lives that letting go for and set intentions for the road ahead. I love the Epiphany House blessings, you know, because we give people a prescription about how to go to about do this and chalk this on your door and all this sort of stuff. But I also like to introduce it as an opportunity for people to ask, you know, what are the blessings that we need in this place, and what will I bring by way of intention into our household for this year. The things that tend to stay with people the most, I think, are the experiential liturgies that we do. And of course, the best example of these, I think, are Lent and Holy Week. You know, it's the time of the year where we get some sense of walking with the gospel in real time. You know, a real 40-day wilderness of, you know, conversing with angels and demons and what it means to be human, and then a Jerusalem time of, you know, walking the steps in the last days. And I love that we know the story, but we can't complete it until we get to the very end. So there has to be that time of suspense. There has to be a time of integration. There's also the participatory stuff we can do with it. You know, there's a great liturgy that Dorothy Ray McRan has put together for Good Friday, an immersive liturgy that has the congregation bringing down the cross and laying it on the ground, laying it among them, and then shrouding and anointing and carrying it into the tomb. That is incredibly powerful. You know, and then you go through that into the devastation of not doing anything at all on Holy Saturday. You know, so that's us entering into the context of the gospel story, but we can do it the other way around as well. You know, take the liturgy into the context of our lives. So this year, one of the things we're doing up here is Ash Wednesday in the Ashes, in which we take the service to the place where the last summer's bushfires devastated the state forest that's near us. And so, you know, the ash under our feet and the new greenery that's emerging are all beautiful images of death and resurrection, but it's also placed in the context that we're not talking about simply an anthropological experience. You know, our ancestry is in the ashes of the flora and the fauna beneath our feet. So our Lenten examination needs to include a bigger picture of sin and repentance and resurrection for the bigger story of life. The stuff that really gets me excited is the liturgy that connects with stories that are outside the church like that. You know, so a couple of years ago, we started participating in Earth Overshoot Day in a liturgical fashion. So on, I think it was 11 o'clock, Earth Overshoot Day is the day when our consumption of the resources of the earth exceed what the earth can naturally replace in a year. So in that day, as our consumption goes up, that day gets moved earlier and earlier and earlier in the year. So the idea is that at the 11th hour of environmental tipping points and unsustainable human behaviour, we toll the bells and we say, well, if we're, you know, if we don't act now, then when, and what is life for anyway? And this is like death, which, you know, we represent by the tolling of bells in the church. If this is coming, whether we respond to it or not, and the call will get louder as the hour approaches. There's other things that we've done, like the lamentation for National Species Day, you know, working with a local artist who composes using the sampled sounds or the sampled voices of endangered animals, you know, literally giving voice to the poorest, the most unheard, the most vulnerable, who are not usually spoken for. So that's become something of connecting with these bigger issues that are going on with us and practicing how do we give religious voice to the things that other people are concerned about. I noticed that in one of his books, Sam Wells talks about liturgy being a sequence of words and actions that we practice for the benefit of common life. You our common life is a place that's both inherited and improvised upon. You know, I love that the prayer book tradition it gives us both pattern and space, where we have the opportunity to ask these questions of, you know, where is life and how can we celebrate it here, and what are our anxieties that need exploring, and what is missing, and what is not being said, you know. But I think above all things, you know, the fact that liturgy is the centre of our lives gives us both license and a little bit of safety to go out and make paths into these spaces.
Thank you so much, Deb. Great whole plethora of tremendous examples of open experiential use of liturgy that draws people in from the edge. Now, in exploring a little bit further with the four of you, one of the obvious questions, I think, is that some of the initiatives that you've described are initiatives that you had underway before you ever engaged with HeartEdge. So I wonder what you think the framework of the 4 Cs has brought to those existing initiatives, and to thoughts about further development and growth. Anyone like to kick us off with that one? John, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think from our perspective here in Melbourne, the 4 Cs and understanding them as being integrated with one another has helped the congregation in its journey, so that not to have a silo effect or a silo approach to relationships with different groups and people. And I think this is anecdotal evidence, not empirical evidence, but from a broader community perspective, when we articulate what we're doing using the 4 Cs, people in the broader community warm to it pretty quickly, become quite engaged and want to know more about that approach.
Anyone else like to come in on that question?
I'll say something, Jonathan, and that is, as I said at the beginning, of we're still some way away from these things coming to a reality, although I think particularly with the music program, that's something that's likely to be starting in the next few weeks, which is very exciting. But in terms of framework, I think that it's really helpful because there's so many disparate parts of parish life. There is, and particularly at St Margaret's, which is one of those places where there's lots of people doing things in different spaces, and in some ways never the twain shall meet. So there's something about what's useful about the HeartEdge missiology is it gives something of a framework for drawing those things together. And I'm really pleased that a couple of the people on Parish Council they've read a couple of the chapters from the book, and that it's really captured their imagination even this early in the piece. So I'm really hopeful that this is something we'll be able to use to actually intentionally focus as we create a new vision plan. So I think it's really useful as a framework in some ways, because in some ways what HeartEdge is encouraging us to do isn't a new thing. A lot of people, a lot of parishes, a lot of clergy have been doing this for decades, if not centuries. But it's useful to have this as a sort of a frame and as a way of pulling it together.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue. I think we may not be able to hear Sue at the moment. So we'll come back.
Right, hang on. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Great. Thank you.
Is that working, Jonathan?
Yeah, I can hear you again now.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is I think what the HeartEdge lens brings to us is is to keep that focus on encountering what is already happening in the world, but bringing, that ways of, it's just, to me, it's a way of seeing and acknowledging the gifts that are already out there. I think a lot of the time we're not stopping and attending enough to see what's actually happening. And I think something the HeartEdge framework did help me to look at and say, what is going on? What are the gifts all around us, the gifts of strangers, and what are the ways that we can be in this world that are beyond, I guess, the more obvious ones are congregation and compassion, but opening our eyes much more to culture and commerce, I think is a way of seeing what's actually already going on that we can engage with, that the Spirit is already doing.
Thank you. So if the edge is those who are on the edge of church or those who are beyond the congregation, to what extent do you think these the kinds of initiatives that you've been describing to us are bringing renewal from the edge, and in what sort of ways? Deb, that was a part of your contribution. Do you want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, I mean, some of these initiatives are about making things easy for each other to join in and saying we're interested in each other, you know. Some of it is about saying the church is a bit more or a bit different to what preconceived notions are, you know. So it's engaging in a way that changes what people expect of us or confronts a misapprehension about where we are, you know. But yeah, I think it provides, also opens up all sorts of different doorways that, you know, like Sue was saying, is saying that, you know, it kind of relieves us of the pressure to do it all on our own if we're partnering with what's already going on out there, or joining in the conversation that's already out there, or loaning a voice to it. But it's also something of solidarity in the other ways. It's like, let me join in with you, let me share in what's going on and bring our gifts to you as well, bring the tools that we have.
Okay. Anyone else want to come in on that question of engaging with those on the edge?
Can I come in? For some reason I can't get my video going, but can I still talk?
We're going to come to wider questions in just a moment.
Oh, sorry.
So
okay.
That's all right. No worries. So one of the
Jonathan, answer the question,
yeah,
of course, if you wish.
Yeah, go
on. People on the edge. So over the last 2 years of my tenure, I've sought to transition, particularly our tenants, from a landlord-tenant relationship to a more substantive one. And so seeking to bring their gifts more fully into our lives. We have a couple of examples, particularly in the area of music, and one in dance for young people, particularly teenage girls. Musicians need somewhere to rehearse and to perform. In the lockdown, all those places disappeared, generally here in Melbourne. We had one musician who brought along 2 friends, and they rehearsed in this space in the church. They were able to share that with a foundation, the Gawler Foundation here in Melbourne, who then provided them with funds to compose some various pieces of music designed to ease tension and stress in the community during the time of COVID restrictions. And so those pieces were composed and then recorded here in the church and then broadcast to the broader community. So that was a way they brought their gifts into a part of the building they'd never used. They composed their music, recorded it, and then broadcast it for the even broader community of Melbourne and beyond for their benefit. And so that was a gift coming from the edge into the building and then back out into the community. And another example would be with one of our dance groups, who the owner of the dance school doesn't do it for academic performance reasons. It's more for well-being, fitness, and it looked like her dance school would close because the numbers had reduced, and it transpired in conversation that some of our teenage students, it was a real outlet for them, and they're enabled them to express themselves in a safe place and to have safe relationships with other teenagers and with their dance teacher. From a commercial perspective, it wasn't viable for that group to continue. So we made the decision here to offer the space at a much greatly reduced rate, if not nothing at all, so that those young teenagers could continue to have their safe space. So they're on the edge for whatever reasons in their life as they grew up. And it was so important for them to dance and to be able to express themselves with that teacher. It then became a priority for us to maintain that safe space for those young people. And so that's continued. There would be just two examples.
Wonderful.
Jonathan, I'd just say also that I think once you actually get involved, things develop, things open up. You know, and similar to what John is saying there, that once we, just in getting started, we went out to Youth in Sync, and you know, we found one of the dads, found out what we were doing, and loved particularly the environmental sort of positive that was going to come out of this while helping other people. And he said, I'd love to help. I've got my own home handyman business. So, you know, he's volunteering to come and help us construct shelves, which we badly need. Other people have said, hey, I've got this many hours later in the week. And so they are, then it's often tagging into, well, it's starting to tag into other church activities as well. So the building relationships comes, but it's actually receiving the gifts of others, often who have nothing to do with our church. But are coming because they can see there's something worthwhile. It's a worthwhile project that they believe in, you know. And I think it's if you're actually doing something that people can that is close to their hearts and that makes a difference, that you will end up in encountering others in many more meaningful ways over this is sort of the central conversation.
Thank you so much. Time's rushing by, and we want to open the conversation up to the questions and comments that you've posted in the chat and to others that want to come in. So I'm going to hand back to Bishop Jeremy at this point to chair the remaining part of our conversation today.